Hello everyone. I take this opportunity to welcome all the learners of PGJMC and MAJMC program of Indira Gandhi National Open University. This is a session on communication concepts for beginners. As you all very well know that we have come up with Google Classrooms for all the learners of mass communication and journalism of the School of Journalism and New Media Studies. And whatever queries were posted on it, we're trying to address those queries through this session on communication for beginners. So in this session, we will discuss concepts like what communication is. I will basically introduce you to the process and effectiveness of communication, forms and barriers of communication, and I have tried to keep it as simple as can possibly be so that people who do not belong to, do not have a background of mass communication will also be comfortable understanding what we're talking about in this session. And then we will deal with all the models of communication and a few theories of communication. Though theories are more than just sociological and psychological theories, yet everything we will not be able to accommodate in this session itself, so we will probably accommodate it in the next session. The models we've tried to cover all of them, whatever are in your course syllabus that is given to you. This includes the Shannon-Weaver models, the Berlow's model, Gerbner's model, Newcomb's model, Wesley and McLean's model, and the theories that, all the theories that comprise the sociological theories and all the theories that come under psychological theories will be discussed in this session. So, introducing the concept of communication. Dennis McQuail is a famous theorist of mass communication, and he had defined communication as a process which increases commonality and also requires elements of commonality to occur at all. This means that if two people interact with each other, they get to know each other better. So the commonality factors between the two people increase. And in order to begin any kind of communication, it is important that one must have some basic elements of common about source, message, channel, and receiver. You would all have read in the course material which has been provided to you in the Google Classrooms and is also uploaded in eGyan Kosh of the website of IGNOU, that whenever we begin telling you about what communication is, the entire definition and process revolves around these four elements of communication, which are source, message, channel, and receiver. So any message originates from the sender or the source. This message is encoded, say for example in language, like the language I am speaking to you in, and through certain channel, we make use of certain channel in order to reach the receiver. Talking about the effectiveness is important because until and unless a communication is effective, it will not have its desired effect on the receivers. And what decides whether this effectiveness exists in any kind of communication or not? One is interpretation of the message. What I say should be the same as what you are understanding. If there is a difference in understanding of the receiver, then the message is not very effective. So one is interpretation and the second is feedback. Like I just said that the process of communication involves these four elements of source, message, channel, and receiver. And the reaching of message from the source to the receiver is one-sided communication. When the receiver becomes the source and gives a feedback on that communication to the sender, so that the sender becomes the receiver, this is called feedback. So for any message to be effective, it is important that it be interpreted in the same manner by the receiver at the receiver's end, and also that a feedback be generated which reaches back the source so that he or she or the media knows how the communication has affected the receivers. Before we go on to the barriers of communication, let me also tell you about the forms. The basic forms that we always discuss are intrapersonal communication, interpersonal communication, group communication, and mass communication. Now, when we say intrapersonal communication, it means talking to oneself. Introspection is an example. Or writing an email and not posting it is an example. Writing diary entries is an example. All of these are examples of a person talking to oneself. When we introspect, when we think about our actions, when we think about what we've done and what we should be doing, or when we plan our future course of action, all that comes under intrapersonal communication within oneself. Now, interpersonal communication, you would all understand, is between two people. So whenever there is face-to-face communication between two people, we call it interpersonal communication. Also, this is the most effective kind of communication because the feedback is direct and instantaneous. Then we have group communication, which can be a small group communication, say for example a group of 5 to 10 people, or a large group communication like addressing an audience of 60 or 100 or a few hundreds. So this group communication is characterized by slightly delayed feedback, because at the same point of time, one is not able to receive the feedback from all the people who have received the communication. And mass communication is the communication which takes place between heterogeneous audiences. So there are certain characteristics. There is one mass media which will at the same time reach heterogeneous masses, faceless masses, and nobody will know how many people have received that communication. So these are the 4 basic forms of communication. Speaking about the barriers of communication, there are 3 different types of barriers that we categorize communication barriers in. One is the technical or the physical barriers. The other is the language barrier, and the third is psychological barrier. When we talk about technical barriers, it could be due to disruption of message due to something. Say for example, your optical fiber got disconnected or it broke. That is an example of technical barrier, and so your internet connectivity is not present. So that is an example of technical barrier. When we talk about language barrier, I just gave you an example that if language between 2 people is not common, it will be difficult to communicate between the 2 of them. So language barrier is another, and psychological barriers are another kind of barriers. Just to give you an example, if one does not agree with a personality who is speaking, there are greater chances that one might not adopt or accept the ideas that the speaker has given to the audience. So we will deal with them in detail now. When we categorize the technical barriers, these can be message distortion, it can be wrong timing, and it can also be information overload. When we talk about message distortion, distortion is any change, unintended change in message that occurs which changes the meaning of the message which has to reach the receiver. So this is called distortion of message. This is also called noise. So noise is any kind of message distortion which leads to the fact that the communication, the way it was designed and intended, is not being made in the same manner. When we talk about wrong timing, it is important to understand that receivers or the target audiences have certain best time when they would like to understand or take your information and act upon it. All timing is not the best timing. Say for example, if a child is tired after 5 hours of study, you cannot make him or her study anymore. The attention span, the grasping power, the focus will all be affected. So this is an example of wrong timing of communication. The third kind of technical barrier is information overload. Now, information overload is a concept that has come after digitalization and greater technology advancement in communication and information and communication technologies. Now, the idea is that we have so many sources, so many media which keep communicating to us on and off on various subjects, that it is difficult for the human mind to retain all kind of information. Hence, human minds suffer from information overload. As a result, they are not able to grasp all the information that comes to them, and not even the more important ones. So this is again a technical barrier of communication. Speaking of the language barriers, we've basically categorized it into two kinds of barriers. One is vocabulary. Like in journalism, they often say that if you throw your reader to the dictionary, the reader will throw you out of the job. Now, vocabulary should be simple when you're trying to communicate and get an idea across. Semantics, the word semantics means meaning. When we talk about meaning, what you're trying to convey should be as clear as you intended to be, because in case you mean something else and you say something else, it is not guaranteed that the receiver will be able to understand it in the same way as you thought he would. So this is an example of language barrier. Semantics of late has also become a method of research in communication studies. So we talk about semantic analysis, whereby we talk about signs and symbols and how these things communicate certain meanings. The meanings may be different from one human mind to another. The third is the kind of psychological barriers. Now, the various kind of barriers that come under this are noise, perception set differences, distrust, and information filtering. You would be wondering as to why we have spoken about noise here when we've already spoken about it in technical barriers. Now, noise can be psychological as well as technical. When your radio channel is not catching the correct frequency, it is a technical barrier. But now when I'm speaking to you about communication and you're thinking of something else, that is a psychological barrier. And in both the cases, this is noise, because it is not allowing you to listen, grasp, focus on the necessary message. Then we have perception set differences. Now, what is perception set? Perception set is comprises of that element of the mind which does not readily change. Like, based on our pre-existing values and beliefs, we start believing a few things to be true, and these beliefs build our attitudes. So it is very difficult to change a person's attitude. And this perception set of, say for example, somebody likes the color red due to a few reasons, and another may not like the color red and may have their own reasons for that. So this perception set will always differ. So one thing that is acceptable to one person may not be acceptable to another. And this again is a kind of psychological barrier. Then we talk about distrust. When the receiver does not trust the source, or there is a jealousy factor, or there are such other human emotions factors, then it is again categorized as a psychological barrier of communication, because you're not able to trust on the message that is being communicated to you. Then we have information filtering. All sorts of information is not accepted by every individual. So every individual will filter the information out of all the vast information that is available in the environment and take only those which they find are acceptable to them. So this is called information filtering. And because of information filtering, all communication will not reach the receiver. And hence this is a psychological barrier. And why we call it a psychological barrier is because information filtering factors are all psychological in nature. Your values, your beliefs, what you accept, what you do not accept, what seems right to you and not to the other person are all under information filtering, because they help you decide whether you will filter in the information or filter it out. Now let us talk about the models of communication. Now there are various models of communication. Selected few have been given in your chapters, like the Herold-Lasswell model. This was one of the primary models that we always discuss in mass communication, and this is very important, because this was the first model that ever talked about the effect of communication. The element of effect was highlighted here. So the model says, who says what, to whom, in which channel, and with what effect. Who is the source or the sender, says what, the message, to whom, the receiver, in which channel, And with what effect? So this was an additional factor after which researches in media effects started growing. So before that, we were not talking of the limiting or the delimiting effects of media at all, because effect was not recognized. Now that this model spoke of effects, there were greater researches happening on media effects, and they are happening till date. They have not become irrelevant. The next is the Shannon and Weaver model. Now you can look at the way this model has been designed. Shannon and Weaver were actually two mathematicians, and while they were working on something, they stumbled upon this model and they came up with this model in which the concept of noise was first introduced. So like Harold Laswell spoke about effects, Shannon and Weaver's model spoke greatly about noise. And they were talking largely about technical noise which enters the channel. So it shows how source encodes its message and sends it through a channel. It gets decoded and reaches the destination, which is the receiver. And meanwhile, in case some noise enters the channel, there will be distortion in the intended message, and the meaning of the message or the way it should have been transmitted might just change. So Shannon and Weaver talked of communication through their technical aspects. Coming to the Berlow's model, which came in the year 1960, it spoke of, again, source, message, channel and receiver, but they were spoken of in a manner that these are four basic verticals. So when we talk about source, which could be humans, there have to be communication skills, there have to be knowledge, social system, attitudes and culture. Like I have certain cultural background that I have experienced and I have grown up with, and my examples will reflect my way of thinking or the way I analyze a concept in the society. So the source has certain kind of communication skills, has a certain perception set or attitudes, has certain amount of knowledge, and the social system and culture play a part in modifying that knowledge in order to personalize it. And then what about the message? Now I am the source. I am designing my message, the content that has to be processed and get over to you in a certain manner. Now what are the elements of this message? One, there has to be content, like the content of the session is communication models, theories. Element, what is the element that we are touching upon? What is the thing that is primarily being talked about? The treatment of the message. Like this is a lecture. It could be a feature, or it could be something else, a film. So, and then according to the treatment, according to the structure is the treatment. So once you decide upon the structure of your communication, you treat it accordingly. Like when you're making a fiction, or when you're writing a fiction, and when you're writing a historical sketch, there will be a great difference between the two. So the structure will decide the treatment, because when I'm writing fiction, obviously I can fantasize more about things as compared to when I'm writing, say for example, the script of a documentary. It will be totally different in its treatment. So the structure of the content will decide its treatment, and the code is the way you encode a message to send it across. Like here I'm speaking to you live. There can be a documentary which has been made which conveys the meanings, like we were just talking about signs and symbols. So flowers, greenery expresses a certain kind of feeling as compared to brown hills with no forests and environment pollution. That creates a different kind of feeling. So that is the code. The code is the way we have enabled the message to get across to the receiver and to communicate to the receiver. Now talking of channel, as we all know, hearing, tasting, smelling, seeing, touching, those are our 5 senses, and media is an extension of these senses. Like Marshall McLuhan almost in the same year, 1962, he talked about global media, and he talked about hot media and cool media. He also said that media are extensions of the man. By this he meant that these are the 5 channels, these are the 5 sense organs that people have, and media extends it. Media is an extension of that seeing and smelling and hearing and touching. So also the receiver. So like source, receiver also has certain attitudes which are based on the perception set. They have certain communication skills, certain kind of knowledge, social system and culture. So if you are listening to what I am talking to you about right now, you do come from certain kind of social system and you do have certain cultural norms and mores to which you would adhere. So these will affect the acceptability and the understanding of my message which I am trying to convey to you. So these were the 4 verticals that Berlow designed while he designed this model of communication. Coming to George Gerbner's model, George Gerbner's model basically came at the time when TV was finding its way into the world. And Gerbner said, perception is different from reality. Reality is not what is real, reality is what is perceived. And perception is different from reality. So, and he explained it very beautifully. Now, if you can look at the slide right now, we have an event which is demarcated by E. This event it has certain selection, context and availability of material. Say for example, media or a journalist, say for example, you as a reporter have decided to cover an event. So there has to be a selection of that event. There has to be certain social context, say for example, spreading of the coronavirus. And there has to be availability of material, research based on which you will be able to write or file a story. The next you can see M and E1. M is man or machine. Machine could be media, man could be a reporter. So it can be either man or machine. And event E has changed into E1. When I go to report an event and you go to report an event, both our reports for the same event will be different. Why? Because there is a certain perceptual dimension to it. Now this perceptual dimension, since there are differences between individuals, will differ from one individual to another. And there will be greater access to channels and media control will also exercise itself. So say for example, there can be something which is of importance to the national defense, which is classified information. So there has to be control on it and it cannot be reported publicly. It cannot be put in the public sphere. So this is called media control. And of course, the access to the channel. If I make a video and upload it somewhere without giving an access to my learners, obviously my communication will not reach you. So this is how M and E1 come into picture and the perceptual dimension becomes important. This is why Gerbner said that perception is different from the reality. The event could have been E, something that has happened, but the way it has been covered by the media has changed the meaning. So E has become E1. And then we talk about SE1. SE1 is the form and content of the social context of the material that we have. So the selection, content and availability decide the form and content of the material. M2 could be, if you were a reporter, there could be a news editor who would decide whether this story will go into the papers or not go into the papers, whether it will be covered, whether it will be cropped, or whether it will be completely, whether it will not be given any space or any prime time. So ME2 is the receiver's perception of E. M2 is the news editor and ME2, M is the receiver. E2 is the way it has been edited, because the story has been filed, then it will be edited and then it will reach the audience. So E1 has converted into E2. So this is quite like this game of Chinese whispers, whereby one person begins with telling a message to one person and there is a group of say 5 to 8 people. By the time it reaches the last person, it changes the meaning and form completely. So ME2 is the receiver's perception of E. The event that took place was E, it changed itself into E1, and now what has reached the audience through the media, via media, is E2. in the light of their social cultural experiences. So this is the reception or consumption end of this communication. So this was the Gerbner's model. Newcomb's ABX model is an interesting one from the point of view of interpersonal communication, because it spoke about internal relations and how these internal relations are interdependent. Equilibrium would exist if A and B would have similar attitudes towards X. Now, I will just give you an example. Let us imagine A and B are two people, and X could be a place or a building or an idea or any such thing for that matter. Now, A's relationship with X will affect A's relationship with B as well as B's relationship with X. So say for example, X is a place that A likes to frequent very often. It could be a park, and I might like to go to the park very often. Now it would either mean that because A and B are friends, either B will also start frequenting the park since I go there every evening, or even A will stop frequenting the park since B does not like X. So this is the interconnection, how the interrelationships and the equilibrium, whether the friendship stays or whether they break off, would decide what kind of attitude they have towards X. X could be a library, X could be an educational institution, a hospital, anything that you can think of, right? And say for example, A continues to like X and B continues to dislike X, then the relationship between A and B would break. It would be disturbed, the equilibrium will cease to exist. So this is the Newcomb's ABX model. And now we come to Wesley and MacLean's model. This model largely talked about existence of filtering mechanism in news. That is what it basically spoke about. So it talked about C. C is this filtering mechanism in news. A, C, B, as you can see in the diagram, is the way news travels from the media to through the reporter to the receiver. Now you can see there are a number of events that are taking place. Those have been demarcated as X, X1, X2, X3, X4, anything. So a number of events take place in a society, and A is a reporter who decides to cover a few out of them. Then there are some kind of news which would reach the news organization directly, which is C, which also has the filtering mechanism of news. So when it reaches the news organization directly, C and all the gatekeepers, be it sub-editor, be it the news editor, if they are all going to decide whether this news can be carried forward or it should be killed. And once it is decided, so in the final shape, the newspaper or the radio program or the TV news bulletin reaches B. B are the receivers of media. So once it reaches B, B sends out its feedback. So B will either, like say for example, during the time of new coronavirus, a lot of information related to the virus has been coming on WhatsApp, has been coming through, being shared through various means, emails, so on and so forth. Now whether B believes them or does not believe them, whether it pays adequate attention to it or does not do that, will also decide the kind of feedback B is giving. So one is that B gives the feedback back to the media. The other, it takes the message forward. Like if we agree with certain kind of messages on WhatsApp, we forward them. So this is the feedback. So feedback comes from B to C as well as B to A. So while you are communicating with the source, you're also communicating with the media or the channel which is talking about it, highlighting it, discussing it, and bringing it to public sphere. So this is the Wesley and MacLean's model. It talked about the filtering mechanisms that exist when news is, shaped up in order to be presented to the receiver, and the way it all happens, and the way feedback travels from the receiver to the channel or the news organization office, as well as from the the receiver to directly the person who has covered the news, the reporter, the journalist, whoever. Now we come to the theories component of mass communication. First of all, it is important to understand why should we study theories. Now look at the postulates that have been put here on the slide. They say that media messages are bombarded on the audience right from the beginning of the day. So the moment you start coming in contact with media, you see a lot of newspaper ads, you see billboards and hoardings, radio announcements, so on and so forth. Then how do you know whether to believe or not to believe? Media dictates our choices. They influence us within our own personal, social and cultural systems. So in order to make our own decisions, whether to make purchase decisions or whether to make certain behaviors inspired by the media, whether to take action based on what the media is portraying to us or to restrain ourselves, we need to study media theories. Now, what is the difference between theories and models? Models basically are representations of a process in a smaller manner. So they tell you how something is happening. And theory is a generalization. It will help you know what is the nitty-gritty of a certain process that is taking place in the society. So this is the important reason why theories should be studied in communication. Let us go on to defining the mass communication theory. According to Barron, Stanley J. Barron is the name of the social scientist, and he has said that mass communication theories are explanations and predictions of social processes that draw a relationship between media messages and personal, social and cultural systems in a society. So simply put, they basically help you understand the media messages in your social context, in your cultural context and your personal context, such that you do not end up being confused and you're able to, make the right choice. So this is what we call a communication theory. Coming over to sociological theories. The sociological theories basically speak about and highlight the role of media vis-a-vis social relationships and in economic and political contexts. So there are a few theories that have been covered in your course material, which I will be discussing here. The first is cultivation theory. Cultivation theory again came at a time when during the advent of the television. TV was new to the society. Social scientists started researching on it and the kind of effect TV has had or was creating amongst individuals. Whenever a new media comes, the wave of this new medium engulfs the society in a big manner. The way internet did 10 to 15, 20 years back. The way television came to India in 1975 and 76 and the way it captured the society. So that is the very appropriate time for social scientists to start studying how a certain medium is being accepted by the audience and what is the rate of acceptability of the medium and whether they are finding it relevant, competent and credible. Now coming back to the cultivation theory. This theory says that TV constructs a reality. It creates frames of references. So like we were discussing earlier, reality is not what is real, reality is what is perceived. And through an audio-visual medium, you are able to see a reality constructed in front of you. So TV is constructing this reality and people, in their minds are accepting it to be true. Through this, it is also creating certain frames of reference. Like, say for example, honesty is a good virtue, is a virtue. If honesty is a virtue and the way it is being portrayed in media, that in films you would usually say it is okay, it is normal to not be 100% honest. So the message that the receiver carries forth is, it's okay and this is happening in the society. It may not be happening in the society, but TV is constructing this kind of a reality which is helping you believe that this perception is real, it is true. So it creates certain frames of reference. It creates a frame of reference of what is right and what is wrong. Like in the Indian society, those who believe in God are the ones who would visit the religious places, the mosques, the churches, the temples, wherever. So does that mean, does that indicate that people who do not visit religious places are not religious? Does religion have something to do with spirituality? Those are the questions. But the way it is portrayed in the TV, it could create a visual, it could create a perception that those people who visit religious places regularly are the ones who are actually religious. And what is associated with being religious? Being pious, being righteous. But are all religious people always righteous? Are they never dishonest? Those are the questions to ponder over. So these are the frames of reference that the television creates. Then it also helps in maintaining power relationships in a society. When you see anything on television, it could be news and it could be fiction. You know how the power relationship operates in the society. Who are the ones who are wielding the power? Who are the ones who are the social elites? And how is it that they are able to impress their point of view upon the large majority whose point of view could be different from what people in power believe? And yet they are able to get across. So this is again depending on the cultivation that television has created amongst the audiences. Then this theory also said that the observable and measurable changes due to television are small. So we cannot be scared of a medium because we think that they are creating a perception which is different from the reality. We just saw in the previous model, even when a reporter goes out to cover a news, he covers it with his or her own perception, which is again different from the reality. But that by no means has a permanent impact, a permanent effect on the minds of the audiences. So cultural theory brought into light a lot of important points regarding perception, the medium, the reality, the portrayal. Nevertheless, the observable and measurable changes regarding this are small, minuscule. The next is agenda setting. This theory largely says that media does not tell us what to think. It does not tell us whether to like day more than night or night more than day. But it does tell us what to think about. It does tell us to think about pollution early in the morning when people go out to walk. So it does tell us what to think about, though it leaves it to us to maintain a positive, negative or a neutral opinion upon the subject of discussion. And then how is this agenda set? How do you think the media sets the agenda for the people? Through some basics that they can control, like the timing, like the placement of the story. We all know that in prime time news, the news that is focused upon first and the one that comes before the ad break is the most important one. Who taught it to us? Nobody. But it is the placement of the story which made us decide that this is the more important news. And we have always seen all along in these years that the more important news find greater time and they are placed first in the bulletin. So also the same goes for newspapers. And then the timing is important. How much time is being allocated? What kind of a slot it is being placed in? Is it being broadcasted at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, or is it the 8 o'clock prime time news bulletin? That is important. Then we have priming effect to understand. What makes you prime? It's like putting a spotlight over one person in a crowd. So similarly, media puts a spotlight over one issue. So it diverts the attention from other important issues. There could be more important issues in the public sphere which call for a discussion, which it is important that the public knows about it and discusses about it. But media creates this priming effect whereby it diverts the attention from those important issues and spotlights one particular issue. So now the debate is who sets the agenda. Whenever media is accused of setting the agenda for the public, media says that it is the public who sets the agenda for us, because whatever we as audiences, as receivers of communication like or dislike is what the media likes to show in various forms. So the debate is unending and it continues. The next is uses and gratification theory. This is a very simple kind of a theory, very broad one and yet very relevant. From the time it was propounded till date, when we're talking of greater number of technologies, greater ways of reaching the masses, this theory continues to stay relevant. And it says that the effects of media are limited to what the people want it to be. Unlike the agenda setting where the media was accused of everything, whatever agenda is being discussed in public sphere is what the media has decided for us. In contrast to that, this theory on uses and gratification, also called need gratification theory, says that the effects of media are limited to what people want it to be. Like during the new coronavirus times, we have started making use of technology for education. Earlier, we were making use of media or technology greatly for entertainment, information, or even finding escape. So after a tired day at work, once you would come back and you would start watching anything that you would like to on Netflix, on television, or your radio programs, the newspaper, whichever way. And then this theory also tells us about what audiences do with the media. So it is not what media does to the audiences, it is what audiences do with the media. How do they play with the media? What use do they put media to? And it explains media influences, media choices, and media behaviors. When we talk about media influences and choices, we all know there is certain element of push, certain element of increased consumerism, which happens because of media messages. So every time advertisements through various media try to sell us something, and if the need of that good or service arises, you start going back to the ads. So this shows that media has considerable influence over your choices and over your behaviors. This is what the uses and gratification theory talked about. The next is dependency theory. This theory says that the power of a mass medium is decided by how much the audiences are dependent on it. So there can be a medium which might be potent, which might have a great reach, but it may not be very powerful because people refuse to use it. So how powerful a medium will get will be decided by how much the audiences are depending on it and making use of it. So now where is this power invested? What is this power that we are talking about? This power is invested in a relationship. What is this relationship? The relationship between the social system, media's role in that system, and the audience's relationship to the media. So media cannot exist in isolation. It is very much a part of the social system that we are talking about. Now, in that social system, what is the kind of role media plays? That becomes important, that becomes significant. And then what is the audience relationship? Does the audience find the media credible? Does it find it potent? Does it believe the content that is being propagated through that medium? This relationship will decide how powerful the medium is. And this also decides the dependency of the people on that medium. So the degree of dependence increases with what? With two factors. One, the rise in the number of functions that media serves. How many functions would you want to use it for? Such that you will not be able to survive without that medium. Like in COVID-19, it is difficult to survive without the internet because everything is dependent on internet and information and communication technologies. Number two, when there is greater conflict and change in the society, it shows that media is creating opinions. When does a change come? When does a conflict arise in a society? When people start believing in different kind of opinions. So if there is a variety in opinion, that means there is greater use of media being made. How else will people be informed and how else will they make their opinions? So greater the diversity in opinion, greater the dependency on various forms of media, not necessarily one, so there may not be a monopoly. And now we come to the last aspect of this session, which is the psychological theories. The psychological theories will be, say for example, we're talking about the attitudinal change theory. Before we discuss about the attitudinal change, it is important to understand the concept of dissonance. The word dissonance means it is the opposite of consonance. Dissonance means a mental discomfort which you face, which you feel when you come across any kind of change. So this attitudinal change theory talks about the three processes that come into play when the attitude, which is supposed to be the most rigid part of human mind, has to change. These three parts are selective exposure, selective perception, and selective retention. All three of them are based upon the understanding of background experiences, upon a person's lifestyle, about the various norms, beliefs that someone has grown up with. So what is selective exposure? People like to expose themselves only to those information which are in consonance with their pre-existing values and beliefs. So if I have grown understanding that it is important to listen to bhajan in the morning, that will be anything that is pertaining to that bhajan or yoga or pranayam in the morning will drive my attention and my behavioral change more as compared to the others. So I would like to expose to that kind of an information more. Then out of the large number of information that you have exposed your mind to, there will be selective perception. There will be a smaller bit of it on which you would really give a thought. Like if you are a believer of Ayurveda, you would like to go back and figure out whether a certain kind of herbal product or an Ayurvedic product worked or did not work in a certain disease. Out of all that you have perceived, still lesser is what retains in the human mind. So the rest gets lost. Only those things will be retained in the human mind which are in consonance with one's pre-existing knowledge and beliefs. So something which is juxtaposed, something which is totally different from what you believe, is not something that will be retained in your mind. So all three concepts, all three steps, the exposure, the perception and the retention, will depend on your pre-existing values and beliefs. And these three together will bring about an attitudinal change for a human mind. Coming now to the reinforcement theory. Now, when we talk about reinforcement, we see again media as a subsystem which is not capable of bringing any change on their own. It is a subsystem of the society, the polity and the economy. And it depends on the nexus of mediating factors and influences like social and religious ones. Now, this nexus of mediating factors will decide, which is again based on the socio-cultural context, the socio-religious context, the socio-political context, as to whether a message being communicated by the media will be reinforced on the audiences or not. So direct effects of media are seen only when, number one, mediating factors are not operational. So they are not doing anything, they are ceasing to exist. And second, when they are impelling a change, they are bringing about a change that media is also pushing. So this creates a reinforcement of that message, of that change. This is called reinforcement theory. The third is persuasion and attitude. Now, persuasion and attitude will largely depend on 5 factors: belief, value, motive, attitude and behavior. Have you ever tried differentiating between these? Have you even given a thought that belief can be different from motive, which can be different from value? Now, what is belief? Belief is a set of ideas one may think to be true. It may or may not be true, but one may think of a certain belief system to be true. What is value? Value is the merit, worth or usefulness of something. Something that you find more important, more significant. Motive is the aim or self-interest of a person. Say for example, if you think your friend is angry with you, you would like to carry a gift for her or him. So this is the aim or self-interest of a person. Attitude. When we talk about attitude, we know that attitudes of people are different from time to time, and they are also the most rigid things. They are less open to change. Impression is something that gets formed and deformed often. After impression comes the belief. Belief takes a little longer to change. and attitude is the most difficult thing to change. So the mindset, which is more difficult to change and is the result of constant reinforcement, is attitude. And behavior is something that we observe in the society. You know, the observed action is called behavior, and it is affected by all the other four factors that we've just discussed: belief, value, motive, and attitude. So persuasion and attitude depends on these 5 factors. Coming to the last theory of social learning. The theory of social learning is also called observational learning theory. Social learning means learning that is taking place in the society, not through books, not in closed classrooms, but through observation. Social behavior and development leads to much learning. Media influences are learned behaviors. What do we mean when we say that we buy a certain product because the product's ads appear more on TV, or you come across more ads on social media of that particular product? Because that media influences the communication that is being made to you in a few seconds is also becoming your learned behavior without you being very observant about it. So you are not aware, but this is happening. This learning is taking place. And the ways in which learning takes place, you would have noticed in childhood or in teenage, a lot of people try and copy film stars through their hairstyles, through their way of talking, the way of walking, the gait, etc. So this is called imitation. Learned behavior takes place through imitation. It also takes place through identification. Identification means somebody who you hold ideal. Could be a parent, could be a teacher, could be anybody else, a thinker, a poet. You try and imbibe his or her way of thinking in your life. That is called identifying by that ideal. So these are the 2 ways of learning. And what is the sequence of learning? What do we mean by sequence? A way how learning will take place one by one. The first step is always attention. You pay attention to a certain thing. It gets retained in your memory and you internalize it. Once that message or that learning has been internalized, you produce it in the form of a write-up, in the form of your actions, in the form of an inspiration that you produce to youngsters, so on and so forth. And then there is motivation to do more, to do better, to progress on that line. So these are the sequences of learning, and this is called Bandura's theory of social learning. I hope this session has been worthy for you and your queries have been answered through this session. Learn well, everyone. Thank you.